welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, another special episode. We're talking Arcane Season 2, Episode 6, the end of Act 2. I'm your host, Ryan, here with the other host, Edge.
Yes, and it's the end of one of the acts, so, nothing's going to happen, and we're all going to walk out of here just feeling a little bored, right? No big changes to the show we've been loving. It will happen in this episode, right?
Yeah, no changes. That's why we're going to do housekeeping.
That's
You're
right.
used to it. It's here. It's expected. No reason to be fearful. You can listen to us everywhere. Visit us at podcastcore.com for all of our info. Email us at podcastcore@gmail.com. Remember, that's COR. Follow us on all the platforms. And then leave a like and comment wherever you listen the most. And tell a friend, word of mouth, to go out with a bang by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
You are a son of a bitch for that. You are a son of a bitch. You're recording this by yourself.
So we're going to hop straight into it. Story best told in 3 parts. Up top, real quick, you can probably hear it in my voice. I'm a bit sick. I'm on the other side of it, so I'm doing all right. But I still have a bit of a cough, so bear with me if it slips through the edits, because I'm also the editor. So we'll see what happens.
We are grassroots to a fault.
But we'll see. It all depends on how much Hetch makes me laugh this episode. Part 1, we start without a montage. No music montage here, but we have Victor and Sky in their Mind Palace place investigating Jace's motives for killing Sallow, and they're doing so by seeing how the wild rune is responding to this action.
And this scene is like for me was the beginning of just like, okay, cool. Like we already have all the memes of just like, Victor is Jesus now, but this was one of just like, okay, great. This is where like you could argue his mind is really being poisoned at this point, because he's been using everything, all the changes that have happened to him for good, right? He has really brought a good bit of good for Jean at this point. But then in this scene, he's looking at this wild rune, and one of the things that he says is perfect chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh no. Maybe it's because I'm a Warhammer fan, but anyone who is just looking longingly at a chaos and being like, this is great.
Yeah.
Bad things are going to come.
Yeah, this is the episode where we see the transition into more of a parallel of the original lore, as we're getting closer to him stumbling upon the idea of the glorious evolution. He's still very early in his quote-unquote metamorphosis, right? But we leave this scene immediately, and we go to Kate and Mbessa having a sparring session. And then while they're fighting, which is like some impressive Sakuga going on here, especially from Kate's side, this is how you can tell it's been a while, because just in combat, she looks a lot better. She's looking more and more Noxian with each day that passes alongside Mbessa. But as they're sparring, there's a background track of them having also a sparring match as far as ideals when it comes to military strategy and what it means to take certain actions and what you give up and what you risk. And then Singe arrives, who they've been waiting on. And he arrives and mentions he's finally figured out how to track down Vander. And he has tracked him down, and he thinks he's in Zon somewhere.
And one of the other things that's happening in the scene too is the whole time that Kate and Mbessa are training, Mbessa is instilling in Kate like the 3 laws of the Noxian warrior. So she's training her, yes, in physical combat, but she's also like kind of changing her mindset as far as like, this is what it means to be Noxian.
Yeah.
And like Caitlyn has definitely improved a lot, which is helping with the time frame. And the other thing happening in the background is our right-hand man, Rictus. That's it. Uncle Ruckus. Rictus is in the background once again, dropping these runes into a brazier and chanting over them. So we're getting the full Noxian experience leading up to I found Warwick. And it really is setting the tone as far as for how far Caitlyn has gone at this point.
Yeah, it's always interesting. We keep bringing up Rictus in the background of scenes because it's obviously well handled, but he behaves almost like a monk more than anything.
Yeah.
When it comes to being, essentially a Noxian soldier at the right hand of Ambessa. One other thing I want to mention as far as the sparring is that I think people have also mentioned this online is that Caitlyn's tall. Caitlyn's pretty
Yeah.
tall compared to like the rest of the cast. As you see her next to Ambessa, who is a large woman, and then holding her own in these matches, which I think they, it it never resonated with me originally, right? As she's becoming more brutal, as she's becoming more Noxian like.
I mean, I'm a disgusting human being, so of course this was something that was already initially in my mind because it's like, hey, bring on the step on me, mommy
Yeah,
vibes. Like
yeah,
the taller the woman, the better the stepping.
yeah. And it's also funny online, and we'll get there in a couple episodes. Uh, People understanding that Kate is a top. All right, moving on. Vi and Jinx and Isha, the trio, have Vander now, right? We talked about in that last episode. They brought him to Victor's commune, and they're seeing it for the first time as well because they've only heard about it. You remember, Zahn is massive, right? So they're in the commune. They're seeking help with this for the situation that he's in because they've heard about these miracles being worked, and they're allowed in, but only after they give up their weapons, right? Standard commune stuff. So Victor finds out that, by touching Warwick slash Vander, that Vander's consciousness is buried there. He can see it, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot more work than any of his other followers he's had to help and heal to get that deep within Warwick to be able to pull Vander's consciousness to the front. And it'll take days, but he wants to help them and he wants to take on this challenge. They talk about it and they agree to stay and allow this to happen.
And the writing for this scene is so well done because they do a great job as far as for Victor's dialogue of using a small amount of time to convey all the information that you need to finish the scene off of like, okay, is Vander actually in there? Yeah, he's in there because he told me. Because they didn't tell him what was Warwick was. So he found Vander. He talked to Vander in there. The other way that it's like, okay, well, how do you know that actually happened? While he's explaining that this is going to take a lot of time, but I want to do it. While he's explaining that, Jinx is making jokes about like a fortune cookie because it's like this guy's a quack. And he just looks at her as just like, well, this is something that I want to work on, Powder. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, okay.
I've
Well,
never met this man in my life.
the quack's got jokes, but it's that moment of like, okay, maybe he's onto something. So they do a really good job because this is only like 20 seconds, but they give you all the information that you need or that the characters need to be able to progress into the next stage for this episode.
Yeah. And then we wrap up part one with Victor and Sky again back in their mind palace, but now working on Vander's mind. And they're starting to see like there's a montage. And this is where most people, shed a few tears with some watercolor used like stylistic montages of Vander's young life with Soko, with the mother of the girls and the girls at a young age. Teaching Vi how to box, right? Playing with Jinx or Powder at the time. And through this, through Victor seeing this is also helping Victor, right? Because he's never had to do something to this extent. He's never had to get so involved in someone's mind to this extent. So he's kind of pushing his own powers and seeing what he can do. And this is important. And they're making progress. And as they're making progress, the trio decides to just explore the commune a bit, see what this is all about, because it's a pretty big area. Even if you think about, Echo and his location, right? At the tree, if you want to call it that, at the great tree, that's a pretty big area of Zon in itself, where a lot of people commune, but they're a part of the Firelights in a way, right? And as they're exploring, Vi's talking to Jinx and saying, what if we just stayed here as a family and helped them out? And even Jinx is like, doesn't have a joke to follow up, right? She's now kind of getting emotional about it because it seems like it shouldn't be a realistic option. And that's how
I
part
mean,
one wraps up.
and especially with everything they went through, a logical response to that is like, I didn't think this is something that was in the cards for me anymore, right? And it like this scene is definitely very heavy, pulling on the heartstrings. But one of the important things, as far as for the I think as far as for setting the stage for what Victor is going to go through throughout the rest of the season, is while he is working with Vander, it is Victor and Sky, but Sky is even telling Victor that, hey, you once said that all systems have their limits. And so she's pretty much kind of coaching Victor into maybe forgetting the Warwick project because it might just be too far gone. So this is a huge toll on both Vander and Victor
Yeah.
because like it's got to come from somewhere, right? So I think that is going to set the stage as far as for what is going to happen to Victor is this progression of trying to bring Vander out of Warwick.
So this takes us to part two. And we start off again with Ambessa, and she's arriving with her Noxian soldiers at the commune. Naturally, in Noxian fashion, they threaten the guards, but Singe is able to convince them to, calm down and let him go in and talk to Victor alone. And he gets in there and he tries to convince Victor to hand Vander over, right? But Victor refuses because he knows why Singe is doing this. He knows he's only doing it because he's trying to find a route to save his daughter. And they have a discussion that revolves around, fate and evolution. And this is the first major time where Victor, through a theoretical analysis of what destiny means and fate and evolution, says the words glorious evolution being the end point.
He
And
said the thing.
he said the
Say,
thing.
say
Everybody
the
turns and
thing,
looks at
Bart.
Bart. He said the thing. And before leaving, Singe reminds him that, okay, well, remember, if something happens to you, that same fate will fall on your commune. And then we get some action here.
Yeah, like that's not foreshadowing at all, is it, Steve? Um, Now, as far as like with this show of force that we get from like the Mbessa and her Noxian soldiers, it is they have done a great job of very much painting a real world picture in the scape of Arcane, like in the Arcane landscape, because it is a heavily armed force standing in front of a bunch of unarmed people and being asked to just, yeah, you can come in here, just no weapons, and then, like they're holding spears in the dude's face that's saying it. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there is no image in real life that actually like matches this, right? What, to quote System of a Down, why don't you go ask the kids of Tiananmen Square? Like
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
like this has ever happened.
Yeah. And this leads on to that being said, is the great thing about this episode, which we've talked about before, is this one's very contained. It's one of the few times we have all the characters in one place. So it flows a lot better, right? As far as the bouncing between narratives, because then we get Vi, waiting for things to happen, kind of wandering off. She's like eating an orange, sees a guard, kind of follows him a bit, and then wanders off and ends up getting captured by Caitlyn. And they have this back and forth because it's the first time they've talked to each other since the betrayal, right? And obviously Vi looks a lot different. And it's not until the end of the discussion where Vi mentions that she's just trying to save her dad. And it leaves Caitlin kind of bewildered. There's no other dialogue from that point. It's just her face, a shot of her reaction of like, wait, what the fuck is going on? Because she's now gaining a better sight of this whole situation.
And I'm sure this is something that like really cuts Kate deep here, because like you can kind of see it in the way that they animate it on her face. Remember that this whole venture into fascism is Caitlyn trying to get revenge for her mom. And the only other thing that we've really seen throughout Caitlyn's venture here, other than her just diving deeper and deeper into Noxian culture, the only other thing that we've seen to remind us of what Caitlyn's motivations are is the declining mental health of her father.
Yeah.
So this is definitely something that must have like kind of been like the slap to the face of like, right, why am I doing what I'm doing? And that kind of sets the stage into what she decides to do from here.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that we will circle back to in a bit here. So Kate shows up at the camp that Mbessa has set up in Zon with Vi as a prisoner. And then Kate decides, or not decides, Mbessa tells Kate, all right, leave Vi here. You go with Singed, essentially, back to the commune to get Vander. Singed has been working on his contraption. He's always working on some contraption. So they leave and leave Vi and Mbessa together. Obviously, they have a few words. And then we cut to Jinx, who, obviously Jinx is probably bored, but she's sitting on top of a lookout with like a spyglass, kind of looking around the commune, seeing what's going on. And she sees Singed making his way back into the commune. And she can tell something's going on. Something's about to happen.
Yeah. And the only chime in I have here is when Caitlyn is going back into the Noxian camp with Vi. Like the way that they're selling what they're doing is Vi is spitting in Caitlyn's face. And I just want to thank all the Caitlyn Vi shippers.
Oh,
y'all saved me from being the grossest human being on the planet because y'all got me beat. Y'all got me beat. And this is not any judgment. I love the memes. Keep them coming. And thank you for your service.
Oh man. God, we are thirsty as a nation. It's gotten out of hand. So Mbessa, we go back to Mbessa and Vi, and Mbessa tells Vi, back to what Hetch was saying about Vi kind of being this anchor on Kate's conscience. Mbessa knows this. And she's pretty much telling Vi that. And she's saying, you're too much of a distraction for Kate, and I need her, which means I need you to go away. And she grabs a knife and plans to deal, quote unquote, with her. And then Vi breaks her cuffs because she did 10 years in the pen, dog. She's not she planned on breaking these cuffs. This was part of the plan. She breaks the cuffs, throws a trap, which tends to be a net. And it binds Mbessa to the table that's behind her, and it starts shocking her until she goes unconscious. And meanwhile, in the tent, Kate is with Singed near Vander. Before Singed can do his thing with his doohickey, she grabs him and chokes him out. Chokes him unconscious, which isn't too hard to do. He weighs probably like 100 pounds soaking wet.
And not to mention that he was also like in a shimmer explosion, and he does not look young even before the shimmer explosion.
Yeah.
Like
he's been around a while.
I just love how Vi is fighting for her life against the leader of a Noxian vanguard.
Yeah.
And from a well-renowned Noxian family. And then Caitlyn gets to be the Logan Paul and fight a 70-year-old man.
Pretty much. I love that we don't know how old Singed is. They've done it perfectly.
I never want to know.
I never want to know. Because him being burned, his skin, all the tattered cloth that he wears, like you can't tell. And the other part is that as we've learned throughout the show, he knows a lot. and he has an extensive background, and he knows a lot of people in Zon. So he's had to be around for a while, but
Yeah.
we don't know that, right? That's very well done.
It's very well done, and it does a good job of like setting the stage to expound more on his story.
Yeah.
Because again, we know at this point that Sin's motivation is to reverse death.
Yeah.
And what is a death that would be like more beneficial for your research to prevent than your own?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it makes sense that if he found a way to like just I haven't defeated death yet, but I can found ways to extend life, he'd do that to himself, right? And just be like, just a couple hundred years old, still trucking around, and nobody needs to know how he's done it.
That's a great point. Yeah. So that ends part two, takes us to part three to wrap this whole shindig up. And we start with the boy himself. Jace now arrives at the camp. The only person missing from this story at the moment arrives at the camp looking crazed and disturbed, as he has been. And he's shocked, first of all, by the sincerity of what's happening in the commune, because his experience with the wild rune at this point is a lot different from what's going on here. He doesn't know what the fuck this is. And he expected to see something, catastrophic, even to the point where a child comes up to him, grabs his hand, and guides him to Victor, right? Because the child can see he's disturbed and see he needs to be helped. He needs to be healed. So there's no like darkness in this child's heart, and no one's stopping him from coming in. So that happens. And when he gets to Victor, even seeing Victor, he's in this meditative state in his own world, just hovering above the ground in this orb, this magical bio orb.
And there's no way that this is even doing more for his, well, I said that weird, but it's got to be worse on his psyche to see Victor in this bio orb, because this is a Victor that's fully healed. He's also, again, in this bio orb, like interacting directly with the arcane, and he's at peace in this community that is at peace. And he's the shell-shocked Vietnam vet that's
Yeah.
just like, how is this? What is happening? What's going on? So this was probably even worse, because it's, he knows what he's here to do, and he has to go into what is suddenly the most peaceful place in the city to do it. Like, that's gotta be just like, okay, well, am I the baddie?
Yeah, his mental is grasping at straws here. Okay. So we get back to Kate. Remember, she choked out Singed, and now she's trying to wake up Vander, because after these sessions, as Hetch mentioned, it pretty much takes everything out of both Vander and Victor. Right? It takes a lot out of them to even do what they're doing. So she gets in there, she tries to wake him up, and then Rictus arrives, surprise, and just knocks her away and is ready to, deal with her. And then obviously the Vander situation, because he sees that Singed is knocked out. That's not according to plan. He knows what Ambessa wants. He doesn't need orders, right? Suddenly, Jinx shows up. And we get a bit of Sakuga here, because always remember that due to the events of the first season, we know that Jinx is in a unique situation where she has shimmer running through her blood. So she's able to have these moments of like peak athletic ability, essentially, right? Where she can move in split second time frames to an extent. There's obviously some like metabolic component to it, but they don't go into that. Thank goodness. They give us just enough.
We don't need metachlorians. We don't need a metachlorians again. All right, like, just, she's got shimmer in her blood.
Yeah,
she go fast.
We go fast. She has shimmer and she messes with hex tech. That's enough, right? She has crystals too. That's good enough, right?
Yeah. We don't need to explain the magic.
Yeah, and also she can fight. That's one thing that I love that's so consistent throughout the life of the sisters, is that we knew Vander could fight. We knew that family was a part of a resistance force. And they, from birth, were trained to fight. And when they played with each other, they fought. And they did things that involved that. They were very capable kids. And that carried on to obviously Vi being stuck in prison. What do people in prison do? Work out, right? And then Jinx kind of being, the right-hand man to Silco and then doing Chembear stuff or whatever she's doing in the background. Once again, still keeping that training active. So it makes sense that they can move and do these things that your average person couldn't do on top of the extra magical abilities, right?
Yeah, and we don't need to try to explain in details. We don't need a paper for that, right? Like
Yeah.
just give us enough of that background, which they did.
Yeah.
These are impoverished kids that grew up within a resistance force.
Yeah.
So they had to learn to fight to survive. Done.
Yep.
Easy. Look at that. Look at that.
Good storytelling.
So many other stories need to take notes on that.
So obviously Rictus gets the upper hand, thankfully, because he does have those suspicious runes on his weapon that allow him to deflect a lot of her abilities and then finally pin her down because he's 3 times her size. And when he does, Vander wakes up. And Vander is pissed and knocks Rictus in one blow out of the side of this greenhouse and tells him, get away from my daughter, essentially, which is a cool scene because it shows that his consciousness is still winning. And then Vi shows up, and then Isha shows up. Vander is awake. Jinx gets up, and Kate shows up, or Kate wakes up, right, to see them together as a family. And it's very, like, you can see her still being bewildered because it's so unorthodox. You got to remember, she grew up on the surface. She grew up in Piltover. So to see what ostensibly is, a a convict, a wild beast machine, a tweaker with magic in her blood, and an orphan hugging as if it's just normal family shit, to her is like, what is going on?
And not to mention that the tweaker is also a terrorist that you
terrorist
that you have dedicated the majority of your professional career into tracking down.
Yeah, you're seeing her be a human.
Yeah, like you get to see her be a human. For me, like one of the most poignant things is that this was the scene that we also get to see the progress that Victor and Vander have made.
Yeah.
Because as far as in the montage, it's just all we know is that they're struggling. Like they are really pushing through. But it's the fact that it's Vander that gets up. This was not a Warwick charge thing. It's Vander that gets up, that hits Rictus away, and says the words, "Get away from my daughter."
Yeah.
So that is in just a 3-second thing. They show all the progress that's been made. And that also helps to kind of settle in your mind the time frame that the sisters and Vander have been here.
Yeah.
So it like a really smart way to just go ahead and wrap up that time in a little bow.
Yeah. Right before you tear it all apart. So before we rip open this gift we just wrapped, Jace is preparing his mace and talking himself into what he's about to do, but not backing down from it. And he sends an energy blast directly through Victor out the back of that giant orb, and it kills Victor. And all of his followers, as Singe mentioned, begin to crumple into unconsciousness on the ground. And then there's this huge bio screech, is the best way I can put it, like a death wail that happens. And as this is happening, we see the greenhouse that Vander was in start to bulge and glow red, and out comes Warwick in the worst rage we've seen to this point, with essentially all the work that Victor has done being unraveled at once and overflowing because Victor's consciousness is gone at this moment. And he goes,
and as I said, and as I said, we got to see all of the progress that was made, which was a lot.
Yeah.
So that rebound is also going to be a lot.
Yeah. The first person that Warwick decides to ultimate is Rictus. and it kills him within seconds. It is a brutal scene.
Very brutal.
Yeah, and I want to mention, I don't know who mentioned this. We've talked a lot in a lot of episodes, but these are the moments where I'm glad they went for the maturity angle of the series. I'm glad they didn't water these things down because when you look at League of Legends, when you look at the concepts, when you look at the stories, it's brutal. It's very grounded and real in a lot of the horrors and trauma people go through, both mentally and physically. So watching Warwick Ultimate, quote unquote, seems like a fun thing. But when you're watching it after everything we've gone through in this episode, this is a great way to really instill instant despair into everyone.
Yeah. And they did it in a very like this is a twisted thing to say, but they did it tastefully
Yeah.
too, because like you're almost getting it through Rictus's perspective. While
Yeah.
also like the outside perspective is just focusing on Rictus' face.
Yeah.
And like his reaction to being ulted. And so like it does a good job of like not turning you away from like the horror
Yeah.
of what Warwick is,
Yeah.
while also being like, yeah, but we're not going to show you like the human anatomy if
Yeah.
we took all the skin away, right? Like it's not being gross for the sake of being gross.
Exactly.
And so they do a good job of that, but I love that they did hang on to the more mature ratings, because we have talked at great length over almost all the characters that we've talked about when we've taken more dives into their stories. The authors that are working on this are authors that have worked on projects
Yep.
like Warhammer, which is it advertises itself as the grim dark future.
Yeah.
Like it's like these are not like writers who are good at doing, you know, cute cozy kid stuff. Well, they're great authors, so they probably could do it.
Yeah.
But that's not what they were doing. They are doing some really dark material. And it's great that they were given a playground to work in without limitations of, hey, remember, we want this for kids. No, screw those limitations. Let the parents decide if their
Yeah.
kid can watch it or not.
Yeah, and Bessa on the outside can definitely notice this is bad, something's happening, and she commands her force to rush the commune because people are dropping out of nowhere. Everything's turning red, because like Warwick literally has magma boiling out of him essentially,
Ugh.
and then there's this massive battle as Noxian forces are rushing in trying to take down Warwick, and he's continuing his carnage through all of them. And then this takes us to the pivotal moment at the end of the episode that brought everyone to tears because it's almost like we should have expected it, but
We
we just like Jinx, took a lot of this for granted.
Yep. I mean, this was one of those things that was like, you know, if you've ever watched any kind of drama, it's like, oh, I really like that character. I don't want anything to happen to that character. And now we've just kind of been programmed of like, oh, I really like that character. Oh,
Yeah.
oh no.
And now with
no.
now with the future knowledge we have of the creators saying that they in their mind are competing with Game of Thrones, we know. So we start off with essentially Isha grabbing Jinx's pistol and running away from her, and she starts to overload it with Hextech crystals. So you usually only need one for it to operate, and she's packing like 3, 4, I don't remember exactly how many, and she begins rushing towards Warwick because she's tiny, right? She's the smallest person out there, and she's ducking and weaving between the soldiers and also not getting hit by him. And she's able to get right up under him, and Jinx finally figures out what she's doing and looks on in despair and starts to rush towards her until Vi grabs her and holds her back forcefully. And then Isha points the pistol straight up at Warwick and fires the trigger, which triggers or pulls the trigger and fires off this essentially massive Hextech blast that destroys pretty much a big portion of the commune, along with everything that was around her and her herself.
and also the episode. Like that
Yep.
wraps it up. And we luckily, like, if you're, for whatever reason, if you're listening to this first before watching it, I mean, thank you, but you're wild. Um, and the thing that we cannot convey with that scene is the whole little montage of Isha running up to Warwick to pull this feed off, and
Yeah.
Jinx trying to chase her, and we get a montage of their time together. Just
Listen.
so that way, like, the whole time Isha's making her move, if you didn't know what was happening, you knew then. And the music playing is in Mandarin, and you don't even need to speak it to understand it. And it's like, oh no.
In any other, and that's where the episode ends, is Hedge mentioned. So there's a little bit of discussion before I cough my brains out. I always think about how much they use the montage, and people mention this in discussions post the show's release, and they use it a lot to the point where it tends to become, like, for any other project, I would see it as being an imitating or intimidating undertaking, because you have to think, are we using this well? Which they are. And that's the only reason they get away with using it so much. Like, using these musical elements, using these montages that are supposed to pull at your heartstring. I mean, we've had one already happen in this episode alone, and it's still effective because they've mastered the pacing of their show. They've nailed it. Even though people say it's a bit fast, and we'll talk about that towards the end, they still use it very effectively.
And I think the fact that, like, the show does feel like it has a very fast pacing is one of the reasons that, like, these montages are as good as they are.
Yeah.
Because it gives the feeling that they really took the time and care for the montage.
Yes.
Because there's, like, we have to move at a clip. So these montages are the way for us to do the extra fluff that we wanted to have in here. And
it's
so
like MSG.
It's that good yum powder.
Yeah.
Like, but they do a great job, like, of really condensing a lot into these montages without pulling you out of the present either. I think that's one of the other reasons that they flow really well, because, like, even with the montage of Victor working with Vander, we're getting back and forths of, like, Victor's perspective, Vander's perspective, what's happening in the greenhouse, and then back and forth. Like, we still get those images of, like, what is happening, like, in the actual moment, and not the montage. And it's the same with Isha's death. We are getting this montage of Jinx and Isha's time together, how Isha viewed it, how Jinx viewed it, and the whole time that we're getting that those images, it's sprinkled in amongst Isha moving to Warwick and Jinx trying to stop her, with Vi stopping Jinx. Like, that's still happening throughout the montages, and I think that, like, really kind of helps not be like, oh, another montage, right? Like, because they're not pulling you out of the action.
Yeah, perfectly well said. And we're gonna wrap it up there because we lied. We thought this would be shorter.
We really did.
But it is an important
I'm surprised.
So.
I'm surprised that we had so much to say about it, because we were joking that it's just montages.
Yeah. But with that, we're a third of the way through, guys. We did it. If you've made it this far, if you're back, I mean, everyone's watched the show at this point. If you haven't, you're listening to this first, go watch the damn show.
Like I said, you're wild. You were wild for listening to this if you haven't watched the show, but thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. And if you're going through this again with us, we appreciate it. And you're also wild because you just finished watching it. So there's no one who's not wild, I guess. But with that, as always, thanks for listening. And we'll be back soon with the next Arcane Season 2 episode. We're almost done. And take care, everybody.